So this morning, like I've been sharing, we're going to be starting a new series called I Am. We're looking at the different statements that Jesus used, saying, I am the, and then fill in the blank. We're going to be looking at least 6 or 7 of them leading up through Easter will be the last one that we're going to be talking about. That will kind of end our series. But to start out our series this morning, we're going to be looking at the statement, I am the bread of life. That's going to be our statement that we're going to be looking at from what Jesus said. And so if you have your Bibles with you, open up to John chapter 6. We're going to be focusing in on there. We're going to be in verses 1 through 59. We're not going to be reading the entirety of that. We're going to kind of look at a few different things to highlight in there. But that's going to be where we're kind of hanging out this morning. And I kind of wanted to start out looking at something in particular. Our culture, kind of struggles, is consistently struggling to know how to exist with each other, with different groups and stuff. People within our society struggle to exist together. All you got to do is turn on the news and you'll see all the different areas in which people just struggle to exist in close proximity and further in great proximity together. There have been so many struggles over the decades, so many debates, so many different arguments about various things that are going on in our world. Actually, right now, I think Meet the Press is on, and they're sitting there arguing and debating about a whole bunch of different things. All these arguments, they virtually talk about everything that you could think of, ranging from, land, ranging from firearms, abortion, the economy, politics, education, and everything else in between. They just, the list could go on and on and on. They're just kind of having struggles and trying to figure out how do we exist together and how do we live together. And I think that as people, we probably could and should all agree on a few basic things. In the Constitution that we have, in theory, we all agree that we have basic rights. We have the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we kind of have all agreed on those things. In Jesus' time period, however, life was so much more challenging than what we have going on, I think. They had so many difficulties, and the things that we just take for granted, especially in America, they struggle with things that we take for granted, like shelter. A roof over your head, 4 walls, a place to kind of live, They struggled with that back then. They struggled with finding not really clean water, because they didn't really have purification systems back then, but they struggled with finding water and struggling with the ability to be hydrated. They struggled with that, and they struggled with food. They struggled with finding food, with getting food, having enough for their families. And to the people during this time period, the basic needs, these are the basic needs that people that they believe that they should have. And it was so difficult for these people just to get enough food to eat, to eat every single day. There were mainly 2 ways that they could get food. They could either harvest it. They could, go out and farm it and plant crops and have plants, and then they could harvest it. They could keep it and eat it, or if they were able to store it for a later time period. And they could, have animals and farm stuff like that. And they could raise animals. The animals could provide for them food, and that was one way in which they could get food. The second way is that they could buy it. And if you had the ability to buy food, you'd have to have money. So you'd have to have a job. So you have to do some sort of trade to get money so that you could buy food at the local market or something to that effect. Food was something that everyone needed and still needs. I think we can all agree food is something that we all need. I was watching this show called Battlestar Galactica. I'm really into sci-fi stuff. I like Star Trek and Star Wars and anything out in space. I just kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. My mom really got me into it when I was a kid, and I kind of have continued that weirdness about me. And so I was watching this show, and they have this fantastic battleship, and they got all these planes and really, really phenomenal technology on this battleship, okay? That they're protecting the fleet. And something happens to them that it never really occurred to me that they would have this problem. They ran out of food. And now all of a sudden, all of these major, like this battleship and all this, the planes and all these things that they had don't matter. Like all their technology, all this, the super superiority that they have didn't matter because they were going to run out of food. And if they didn't have food, they'd die. And so they went to great lengths to go to find food, to try to make sure that they could survive. The crowd in Jesus' time period, they struggled with getting food, and it just wasn't really easy for them to get food. It took a lot of effort. It took a lot of work. And we find Jesus here in John chapter 6 dealing with a very hungry crowd. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore, the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs that he had performed by healing the sick. And so at the beginning of this chapter here, we see that Jesus is just having finished healing some people. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were in this crowd and I saw Jesus healing people, I would follow him. I would want to go see what he's doing or continue to see who this guy's, what is he about, you know? I'd want to hear what he has to say because he just did something that I didn't think could happen, you know? And so Jesus finishes healing these people, and he heads to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and the people follow him. Now, I think it's important here that we look at this crowd here and identify kind of what this crowd is. This crowd is a bunch of people who are probably hungry. Some of them are probably, maybe still sick or struggling in some capacity. And there's a ton of people that are following him because he had been healing people. And as Jesus finds his way to shore, he sees this crowd, and one of the disciples begins to get a little nervous and get a little antsy because this massive crowd of people were around. And so he gets kind of antsy and nervous, for good reason, because this huge crowd was there. And so Philip was really worried about how people were going to get fed. Because Philip knows how difficult it is to find food. I mean, he's a person back then, so he understands how tough it is to get food, let alone to get enough food for 5,000 people. And so I kind of wondered, I stopped in that text this week, and I thought to myself, how easy, or really how difficult, would it be for us to provide 5,000 people food? So think about that for a moment, okay? I want you to all, in school we said, put your thinking caps on. So put your thinking caps on, turn them on, because I never turned mine on when I was in school. I just put it on. So turn your thinking caps on and think about how in the world could we feed 5,000 people today? In our time period, how easy would it be? It would not be, you would think, if you didn't really start to critically think about it, 5,000 people, that's no big deal, just go down to the supermarket. But no, I wonder if the supermarket even has enough food to feed 5,000 people. There aren't very many, if any, organizations in Vermont, maybe let alone the Northeast, that could readily feed 5,000 people. So if we went down to Shaw's, could we find enough food to feed 5,000 people? Or maybe we'd have to go to Hannaford too, or to the other one, Price Chopper, or to Trader Joe's, or to Healthy Living, which I call Wealthy Living because my pocket hurts when I go in that store. It would be very difficult to feed 5,000 people. And this is the task that Jesus was up against, and Philip kind of understands this, right? And so when Jesus asks Philip in verse 5, which I think is kind of fun, Jesus looked up and saw the great crowd coming towards him, and he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Now, I like to think of, Jesus is a person, right? He's a human being. He has emotions. And I love to think that Jesus can joke. He can make jokes and kind of be funny and stuff like that. 'Cause I think that we believe, for whatever reason, that Jesus is serious all the time. He never has any fun or anything like that. And so I think to myself, there's probably two ways that Philip could interpret what Jesus is saying. Either A, yeah, Jesus is just kidding. Like, Jesus is just messing around. Like, yeah, okay, we're going to feed 5,000 people. Jesus, yeah, sure. You're a funny guy. Very, very funny joke. Which I think would be, I have that picture in my head. I just think it's hilarious to think that Jesus could make a joke like that, right? Or Philip could think, this guy is actually serious, and he's not making a joke, and he wants to do what I believe is to be the impossible. Jesus is serious, and so we find out later on, Andrew brings forward a kid. He takes his lunch from him, which is kind of silly. Takes 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? And now personally, I think that, that I would assume that the fish would probably be, I don't know, somewhere in this vicinity. Maybe, I don't think it's anything like this, but it could be, somewhere in this neighborhood. And I would think that this 2 fish and, some loaves of bread could probably feed 2 families. If you skinned them on either side and you really chopped it down really small, you could probably feed 2 families if your children would actually eat fish, which mine do with a lot of encouragement. But there's no way that you could actually feed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? And so Jesus takes this bread, he gives thanks to God, and he broke it and starts to distribute it. Now the important piece here, I believe, is that he gives thanks to God, and then he didn't just take this kid's lunch and then just start passing it out. He gives thanks to God, and he breaks it, and he does this amazing thing. He starts to pass it out, and he does the same thing with the fish. He starts to pass it out until everyone had enough to eat. Not just everyone had like a nibble or just a small little bit. Everyone had their fill. And they had 12 baskets left over. That's just a phenomenal thing. Now, at this point in Jesus' ministry, if there is ever a good reason for the people to make him king, this would be it. Think about this group of people. They work tirelessly just to get enough to eat every single day. Now they've got this guy whose name is Jesus. Not only can he heal the sick, he gives us free food. And he can just multiply it and just take food and just multiply it and just kind of start passing it out. And we were not really sure how this happened. He just starts feeding everyone. So of course, let's make this man king. Let's make him our king so that we don't have to be hungry anymore. We can just have all the food that we could potentially get. And if you're sick, just go to Jesus and he'll heal you. This kind of is the mentality of this crowd at this time. This crowd didn't have to pay Jesus for food. They didn't really even have to work for it. He just gave it to them. He took this food, blessed it, and started passing out the food, and they had all of their fill. And the crowd wants Jesus to be their king, but they're not willing to allow him to really be who he has actually come to be and to do. They want him for a specific reason, for a specific need. And so towards the evening, Jesus is realizing that this crowd is kind of getting kind of antsy, and they want to take him by force, as it says in the text. He retreats to the mountainside by himself. And he goes off by himself. And then we see here in verse 16, when evening came, the disciples went down to the lake, and they got into the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. And it was dark, and the seas began to get rough, and wind and waves, and they start bouncing around, and they're getting really afraid. And all of a sudden they see Jesus, this thing coming across the water, and they realize it is Jesus because he says, "It is I, don't be afraid." Now this is I am statement. This is just Jesus saying, "It is I, don't be afraid." And he joins them in the boat and calms down the sea the second that he gets in, Once this crowd figures out that Jesus has left and gone to the other side, they decide to go follow him. And they actually find him, which is pretty cool. The interesting thing is here that this crowd wants to see Jesus. They want to be close to him, and they want to be near him so that he can do all these amazing, miraculous things, so that they can make him king. And Jesus knows what they really want, is they really want food, and they want bread. They want tangible, physical sustenance, living in a world that is challenging to get it. They have this need, and they want to be near Jesus so that this need can go away, so that he can supply their need of bread. And we need to realize that their need is important. Like, this isn't a small problem. Like, this is a big problem back then. And so, it's important to note that. But Jesus has something that is so much more, something so much greater to give them than just physical bread. Their pursuit of bread shouldn't be their highest priority. Their highest priority should be seeking out Jesus. One of the main reasons why the crowd is aware of the possibilities of Jesus is because all of this is happening during the feast of Passover. And they're remembering this guy from way back when, whose name is Moses. And this guy Moses did some pretty amazing stuff. They're remembering Moses who when the people were in the wilderness, he got them manna. He provided manna. And when they were thirsty, he provided water. And this is kind of the mentality of these people. They believe that maybe, just maybe, that this Jesus character could be like Moses, is going to be like the great prophet that is to come, who's going to be like Moses and provide for them food and water when they need it. However, this crowd is more focused on what Jesus can do for them rather than on who Jesus is. This crowd saw this man turn a kid's lunch into a feast for 5,000 people. And what's amazing is that Jesus is just so patient with them. He's so patient with them. And he's patient with us as well, He knows that their focus and realizes their mental struggles of thinking of something that's outside the box, something that they might not have considered yet. And he understands that their blindness. And he says in verse 26, Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw a sign I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." You see, Jesus is kind of giving them an opening, a window into what his ministry is going to be. He is making his identity known to them. Yet they still want Moses, because Moses did stuff for their ancestors. They don't realize who Jesus truly is. And Jesus begins to see what's happening, and it's kind of, in my mind, getting maybe slightly frustrated. They're not really getting it, kind of a good frustration of like, I want you guys to get this, but you're not quite understanding it. And he shares with them that he is more than just a prophet. That the manna that their ancestors received came from God, his Father. That the manna didn't come from some magic trick, or Moses didn't do some magic trick and all of a sudden things happened. But it came from God. It came from heaven. You see, the bread and fish that Jesus provides to the people, to the crowd that's there, is supposed to direct people's attention to God's new gift, a new Passover. But all they can see is fish and chips in front of them. The crowd reveres Moses, and the crowd loves Moses and longs for the prophet that Moses spoke of. And generations of prophets have come and gone. Many of them were either ignored or overlooked or even killed. And their ancestors heard the very word of God through these prophets. And many of them had missed it. And now the writer, we see here the prophet, like Moses, the fulfillment of all of what the previous prophets had spoken about is right there with them. He's right in front of them, and they were missing it. And Jesus doesn't want them to miss this opportunity. See, Jesus challenges them that the bread that their ancestors got from heaven was true bread, and that it was the bread that came down from heaven and gives life to the world. People who are hungry for bread are not necessarily blind to their reality. See, they just need to make sure that their priorities are in line. And now at this point, some are beginning to figure it out. Jesus says this, and it makes a final appeal to them. He uses the clearest message that he believes that they could understand. Jesus doesn't use a parable like he's done in the past. He gives it to them straight. And he says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Unfortunately, many in the crowd who hear him but don't really understand him because of their unwillingness to grasp the significance of what he is saying. Some simply are trying to hold on to their traditions. Some just want Jesus to provide for them another meal. In a world where the tangible, the physical, the visible represent reality for so many, it is often difficult for people to grapple with spiritual meanings and priorities. But the word that Jesus gives to the people really drive home and provide meaning to his mission. It kind of reveals to them who he is and what he is about. The people, and we see in the text kind of argue amongst themselves about the significance of what Jesus said. And while Jesus is trying to steer the conversation, trying to steer what they're talking about from the mindset of bread being something that is temporary, he's offering them something that is everlasting. When Jesus says, I am the bread of life, it is in fervent hope that the people who saw this miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, will grasp the wonder that is Jesus. And the wonder that God is beginning the final chapter in his redemption of the world. This bread that Jesus points to, he points to a grand reality that is more than just bread. God has come to earth in his Son. A food that endures for eternal life is ours. And all we need to do is accept it. Would you pray with me? Father God, we thank you so much for this amazing story, this amazing narrative of how Jesus healed so many people and then fed so many people. And God, I pray that you would help us to realize that he wasn't just trying to fill their stomachs, but he's trying to tell them, I am here to fill you up completely, that you will never go hungry. And I pray that you would help us to realize when Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Not something else, not someone else, but it is Jesus who is the bread of life. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your message. God, I pray that it would penetrate our hearts and that we would take that bread and it would renew our spirits, and that we would, God, that we would maybe share that with someone else. For you are the bread of life. And when we have that, we will never need anything else. God, we ask that you would be with us as we consider your message, as we go forward in our day and our week. Be gentle with us as we digest it and help us to really reflect on the fact that you are the bread of life. and that you are enough. We love you so much this morning. Amen.